So, help us understand this. So not every game is designed well. One of the concepts we're discussing in the class is ludonarrative dissonance, by which the game's narrative is in conflict with the actual gameplay. In the article, you discuss how structural characteristics of the game may provide unique affordances that traditional therapies do not offer. However, if the game itself is not well balanced in design, or the gameplay induces, say, feelings of frustration or resentment, how would a researcher screen out the frustration caused by bad game design from, say, genuine frustration that they might feel that's independent of the game?
Okay, well, can you give me a little bit more, maybe give me an example of what you're thinking of for,
Sure.
We all understand frustration caused by the game, but what do you mean by independently of the game in this case?
Right. So what I'm curious. So one of the things that I'm curious about is that we've talked about using interventions to help people who are in the gaming community.
Yes.
And so if we're talking about gathering information about those people through direct evidence-based data gathering, what I'm wondering is that would that be coming through gameplay dynamics, through the actual actions of playing the gameplay?
Yes.
So for example, somebody's being particularly aggressive, for example, right? Is that a cause of something? Is that something inside the person that would trigger a potential intervention or something like that? And so what my question is that, we're talking about doing intervention work or trying to reach out to people based on these experiences and this data we're gathering. My question is that what happens if the game's not designed well?
Gotcha. Okay, I think I understand. So how can you tell if you're doing an experiment, for example, how can you tell whether the game itself is frustrating or what you think might be helping is just not helping, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So let me first just put it in perspective. When I was talking about the structural characteristics of games, in that particular case, I was talking about games that just engage you and force you to think about things so that you can be distracted through continuously reacting to things. So, maybe like moving Tetris blocks or using logic to have to match puzzle elements or play your next card. Forcing people to move around as a way to promote physical activity. Those were the specific characteristics that I was talking about in that case. But let's say that you are also designing frustrating aspects into your game, maybe just as a type of gameplay, or maybe because you want to monetize, like microtransactions and pay to win, right?
Yep.
It can interfere with what you're trying to do, because as you get frustrated, the flow is harder to achieve because you've exceeded that challenge threshold. Yeah. So that can conflict with your desire to have that game have an effect.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
In my opinion, I'm not a design expert. I feel like, obviously your course is really focused on design. So I'm going to take from a couple of things that I'm very familiar with, which is one, the Games for Emotional Mental Health Lab, which I was fortunate enough to be a part of for many months. Isabella Granick and her crew talk about the importance of empathy in design and using a participatory approach. So you can think of, as a simple form of user experience research, how we can do cognitive debriefing or other methods of finding out what people are experiencing when they're playing. But I think working much more closely with the group that will be using the game, and trying to figure out what is going to be frustrating for them from the beginning, and following that process through to, let's design it together, let's play it together, tell me what you thought when you were playing it. I think those kinds of things are going to be very important to make sure that your game is not poorly designed and doesn't induce things that would make it, make the potential affordances not visible.
Yeah. It does. And it's interesting because, there's really kind of, it strikes me, and perhaps I'm mischaracterizing, but there's kind of two schools of thought about this. One is looking at games that are designed specifically to have therapeutic elements to them inherently. They're designed with that. They're designed by research people who are designing specific mechanics. Then there's the other side, which is kind of commercially available games that any of us just pick off the shelf and play. And it's interesting trying to see the intersectionality between what is the data you would get from the commercial side, and then which is frankly where the larger number of players is, I would imagine, and the more money, and the bigger marketing. And then you also have this other side where somebody would usually probably choose to be a self-selected group to be involved themselves, either a certain kind of player, they're looking for something, the game was recommended to them for more psychological play. Or therapeutic play, I should say, not psychological, but therapeutic play.
And that can be either through like a gaming community, or maybe eventually through psychologists or psychological community. But here's another thought. Another way to approach that with a commercial game, for example, would be to use, even if you're doing an experiment, there could still be different things about the people who ended up being in the experiment that could be causing the effects. Not causing them, but contributing to the effects. So in the case of what you described, you might find that the game overall didn't show a beneficial effect, but so your hypothesis might be, does the game show a beneficial effect? And when you do your statistical analysis comparing your randomly assigned people who either played the game or didn't play the game, there could be no effect, right? But perhaps you notice that many people got so frustrated that they stopped playing it. Now, normally in the most rigorous study, you would want to analyze people regardless of whether they stopped playing it. But it's perfectly legitimate to say, overall, we didn't find an effect. But when we went back and looked at it, the people who kept playing it had a strong effect. And we find that with a lot of interventions, especially digital interventions. They can work in pilot studies, but people don't keep using them. And when that happens, the effect falls out.
Interesting.